This past July, the following news headline caught my attention. A zoo in Cairo, Egypt, was accused of deceiving visitors by painting zebra stripes on a donkey. The zoo director insisted the animal was the real thing, a zebra. A young visitor to the zoo noticed the strange-looking animal. It looked as if the stripes of black paint had melted on the donkey's face, and the animal's ears were much larger than a zebra's ears. The visitor posted a picture on Facebook of himself standing next to the animal looking bemused. The post went viral, of course. The zoo denied wrongdoing. But the next day, the animal had mysteriously disappeared from the display. Now, at first, this story made me laugh, but this headline remained with me as I contemplated the implications of this seemingly trivial occurrence in a faraway place. The story perfectly illustrates who we are as a society on this Yom Kippur 5779. As human beings charged with the world's creation, with stewardship of the earth, we are part of an impressive and unprecedented global community. But increasingly, we are becoming untethered from the truth. This is no trivial paradigm shift for humanity. For as far back as Roman times, truth has been exalted as a fundamental virtue. In Roman mythology, truth, veritas, is personified as a young virgin who is dressed in white and holds a mirror. According to legend, veritas is often hidden at the bottom of a well because veritas is viewed as elusive and difficult to grasp. And for many of us today, I suggest that veritas has become increasingly vague, hidden, perhaps even missing. In her new book, The Death of Truth, Michiko Kutanani suggests that we are living in a post-truth world. Truth has fallen so deeply into the well that we have adapted to life without her. We have evolved away from truth as an organizing principle of our society or as an identifying feature of humanity. Kukatani writes that lying has simply become a way of life. Now, for me, the death of truth is a nonpartisan and non-political and has emerged over time. Lying was not suddenly created during the 2016 presidential election, nor did it originate at noon on January 20th, 2017. The assault on truth is more serious than trying to pass off a donkey as a zebra, and more sinister because of the lie's quiet but persistent evolution over time. Over the past year especially, we have seen the devastating effects that turning away from truth has had on us and our society. Our denial of truth leads to a devaluation of our words and our language itself. Our proclivity for lying blurs the lines between perception and reality. Our view of the world through lenses of falsehood and fabrication results in a lack of trust in one another and a waning confidence in our legacy institutions and their leaders. As a Jewish people, there have been times in our complicated history when clinging to a falsehood has caused a complete breakdown in communication with one another. Early in the book of Genesis, following the tale of Noah and the flood, we recall that the people attempted to build a tower out of bricks, extending up to heaven. God, in order to halt the construction, confounded their speech, causing each person to speak a different language. Unable to understand each other, the people abandoned the tower and scattered. The rabbis ask, what was wrong with building a tower to the sky? Isn't it good for people to aspire toward heaven? The rabbis also, however, read between the lines of the story to show how the problem with the Tower of Babel had nothing to do with trying to reach God. According to classical midrash, the tower was so high that it took a person an entire year to climb from the bottom to the top. Every brick that was baked on the ground and then brought to the top of the tower was, therefore, considered extremely valuable. It represented a huge investment in energy and time. As the tower grew, its builders began to value the bricks as more precious than the people who carried them. If a person fell to his death, they paid no attention. But if a brick fell, they sat weeping for days, saying, "Woe upon us! Where will we get another to replace it?" The sin of the builders of the Tower of Babel was not that they wanted to reach the heavens. The sin was, in the course of building, they turned human beings into mere commodities of limited value. They elevated falsehood and greed over humility and lost touch with the truth that human life is priceless, that we are each created in the image of God. While we can no longer blame humanity's contempt for the truth on towers or bricks, we nevertheless find plenty of evidence for our waning relationship with Veritas in matter-of-fact encoded emails, truncated tweets, and abbreviated text messages. We communicate today via electronics and screens, devoid of detail, affect, or nuance. We talk at one another rather than with one another. In the fall of 1989, Princeton University welcomed into its freshman class a young man named Alexei Santana. He had barely received any formal schooling and spent his adolescence almost entirely alone, living outdoors in Utah, where he herded cattle, raised sheep, and read philosophy. Jogging in the desert, he had trained himself to be an outstanding distance runner. Santana quickly became the star on the Princeton campus. He did well academically, and his reserved manner and unusual background suffused him with an enigmatic appeal. However, Santana's story, yes, you guessed it, was a lie. About 18 months after he enrolled, a woman recognized him as somebody she'd known as Jay Huntsman, a student at Palo Alto High School. But even Jay Huntsman wasn't his real name. Princeton officials eventually learned that he was James Hogue, a 31-year-old who had been accused of theft in Utah and was a fugitive from the law. He was taken away from Princeton in handcuffs. A research study conducted in 2003 found that lying corrupts our words and language as well as the fabric of our societies. In fact, researchers found that liars and truth-tellers communicate in qualitatively different ways. For example, those who lie tell stories that are less complex, less self-reflective, and less optimistic. The researchers concluded that liars can almost always be identified by listening carefully to what they say and how they say it. In addition to falsehood causing a complete breakdown in communication with one another, we have also seen, especially in recent years, that the devaluing of truth actually gives rise to a blurring of lines between perception and reality. Over the past year, Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, Flint, Michigan, Puerto Rico, and demonstrations for immigration reform have put on notice the status quo of lies and violence against people and against God's creation. Our post-truth era has elevated each of us and our individual opinions to the level of an expert on any given subject, and when combined with arrogance and hubris, leads to an abuse of power. On a cold January morning in Washington, D.C., a young man took a violin out of its case and brought it to his shoulder. He was unremarkably dressed, just jeans and a white t-shirt. He had shaggy brown hair and wore a baseball cap. After a few moments of tuning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins, which he threw into the violin case that was open in front of him, with the hope that perhaps a few passers-by might do the same. It was a busy morning in the metro station, and the young man began to play. Now, thousands of people were on their way to work or school or wherever they were going, and it was very noisy. Trains coming and going, and the rush of the crowd, many on cell phones chattering away. Yet, through the busyness, the sounds of this man's violin filled the metro station. It was impossible to ignore it. Or was it? In 43 minutes, more than 1,000 people walked through the doors where the violinist was playing. And if he was anyone else, perhaps it would have been insignificant that he received just a handful of change and the attention of a small number of people. But he wasn't anyone else. In fact, he was Joshua Bell, perhaps today's most renowned soloist violinist. And he was playing one of the most difficult pieces ever composed on a $3 million violin that emitted one of the most beautiful sounds in the world. Yet no one, not anyone, noticed. Why? I suggest it may have been because he didn't look like anyone special. How easily do our perceptions eclipse the truth and distort reality? The subway riders that morning in Washington had no idea that they had walked by a concert violinist who just 2 days from that time would be in Boston Symphony Hall performing before a full house with ticket prices starting at $100 a seat. When we serve as our own self-appointed experts, when we shut out the possibility that there is some truth that is larger than ourselves, when we no longer plumb the depths of reason to arrive at a better understanding of not just the world as we perceive it, but the world as it is, we miss out on not just the truth, but the sheer beauty that truth brings. In addition to falsehood causing a complete breakdown in communication with one another, and the devaluing of truth giving rise to the blurring of lines between perception and reality, the Talmud teaches that when objective truth is replaced by subjective perceptions, they become intimately linked. In other words, we no longer see things as they are. Rather, we see things as we are. I want to say that again. We no longer see things as they are. We see things as we are. That is, all we see is ourselves. We become the subject, object, and main character of a narrative that is ours alone, and that places us in a world that is comprised only of our own thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And I dare say that this is where many who are in both the public sphere and the private corners of our lives are now living. My friends, according to Jewish thought, individualism to this extreme is none other than the sin of idolatry, the elevation of falsehood, the worship of self. A couple of years ago, the New York Times reported on a new phenomenon called a mirror fast. As a response to the increasing narcissism of contemporary society, which values vanity and egotistical self-absorption above so many ideals, People who commit to mirror fasts take a vow of abstinence from gazing on their reflections for a day, week, or even longer. One woman who abstained from looking at the mirror for an entire year said that the idea of the experiment was to stop reflecting only on your own reflection. And what did the mirror fast accomplish? They were an antidote to unbridled egotism. They were a way for people to take a sabbatical from self-absorption, to call a temporary halt to our overriding concern for physical appearance. It's a way of reminding ourselves that the real me is far different from what appears in the mirror. When the Torah says we are created in the image of God, and because God is intangible, I suggest being created in God's image refers to something far more significant than face or figure. It refers to the soul that defines us. Appearances are misleading. They are untruthful. Appearances ignore the inner essence. In the Hasidic tradition, there is a story about the way mirrors seduce us and then lead us astray. A very rich young man went to see a rabbi to ask advice about what he should do with his life. The rabbi led him over to the window and asked him, "What can you see through the glass?" "I can see people coming and going, and a blind woman begging for alms in the street." Then the rabbi showed him a large mirror and said to him, "Look in this mirror and tell me what you see." "I can see myself." "And you can't see the others. Notice that the window and the mirror are both made of the same material, glass. You should compare yourself to these two kinds of glass. Poor, you saw other people and felt compassion for them. Rich, covered in silver, you see only yourself. You will only be worth anything when you have the courage to tear away the coating of silver covering your eyes in order to be able to see again and love others." The rabbis convey a powerful lesson about the danger of self-absorption and narcissism that blinds us from seeing the truth that others have to offer. The American author and humorist Mark Twain once wrote, "When in doubt, tell the truth. It will confound your enemies and astound your friends." Twain understood that while the lie sets us up for misery, telling the truth brings humor and joy. And on this Yom Kippur, known in Hebrew as Yom Hadin, the day of judgment or the day of self-judgment, we must understand there is no justice without truth, that lies and the principles of democracy are fundamentally incompatible, that we need Veritas's mirror if we are truly going to effect the teshuvah, the self-assessment and self-judgment that these high holy days ask of us each year. May you have a meaningful 25 hours, and may we all, as individuals and as a nation, rekindle the vision of truth in the year to come.